He left the ditch, went to the houses in the neighborhood, in the Christian neighborhood, but no one wanted to help him. And that night he knocked on many doors, but each and every time the door was closed in his face. Finally he went to a house of an elderly woman, knocked on her door, asked her to let him in, but she did the same thing. And then young Zvi Mikhailovsky got a brilliant idea, a brainwave, when he said, "Don't you see who I am? Don't you see that I am Jesus who has come down from the cross? Can't you sense my pain and my suffering? Can't you see my wounds?" And then everything changed. She said, "Bože moj," His words changed everything. She left him in, she gave him food to eat, water to drink, a bed in which he could sleep, and he was there for 3 days and 3 nights. And when leaving her house, he ordered her not to reveal that the crucified one had visited her. So why do I mention this story, this true story, that this happened? It's because for 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been arguing about to whom the scriptures belong, whether the 53rd chapter in the prophet Isaiah, in its truest sense, is about the Jewish people as a collective, or whether it's about Jesus of Nazareth. By connecting these two master stories of Jews and Christians, this Jewish boy helped the Christian woman to overcome her inability to see the plight of the other, to see the suffering servant, to see that the suffering servant was a fellow human being and a Jew. So this remarkable and for me unforgettable story tells me something about how close the Jewish and Christian traditions are to each other. I've said all this tonight because I want to share with you my deep conviction that Christians and the Christian world and those who live and teach and preach in the Christian world need to unlearn. They need to learn and they need to unlearn. So what can we do and what must we do, as I said in the beginning? And I would like to say 3 words here: elucidation, encounter, and education. So elucidation, the problems are so vast, the rhetorical Jews are so close that Christians do not see them. They need help to identify the problems in their own theological thinking. And we heard in the introduction here that I take groups to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and I tell them, if it's a Christian group, I tell them to pay attention in what context they see Christian symbols. Where do they see the cross, priests, bishops, churches, New Testaments, etc.? So it's a matter of elucidation, illumination, enlightenment to realize the role that Christian teaching or contempt have played in history. That's the first E. The second E stands for education. I arrange courses in Jerusalem at the Swedish Theological Institute together with Yad Vashem now in January, the next time. And we need to study historical questions, but we also need to pose those theological questions. So why is it so important to present Judaism as the contrast rather than the context? Why is this urge so important? Or as John Dominic Crossan wrote in an essay, a review recently, why did Christianity arrive and why did Judaism survive? Isn't that a very good formulation? That those who will teach in Europe, those who will preach in Europe need to ask themselves, why do I think Christianity arrived and why did Judaism survive? And if you don't have a good answer to that, it will be a very bad theology for the Jewish people. I'm a Christian. I'm ordained. Whenever I enter a church, whenever I attend a Christian service, I know that I'm a Christian. I see the symbols, I sing the hymns, I know I'm a Christian. But when in Jerusalem, I always attend the Kabbalat Shabbat service on Friday evening. And there is one moment, it's a beautiful service, the entire thing, but there's one moment that I think of the climax, the epiphany for me, V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam brit olam, b'ni uven b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam. It shall be an eternal sign forever between me and the children of Israel. So what does it mean that it is that Christianity arrived and Judaism survived? Now the last E. The last E, I promise you. The third E stands for encounter, meeting the other, spending time in Jerusalem, experiencing Shabbat in Jerusalem, walking home from synagogues on a Friday evening, meeting all these people who don't know where they are going and they can't call anyone and they can't draw a map. And it's a lovely experience to be in Jerusalem. Those of you who have been there recently, you may know that the Rakevet now is a wonderful park. But before the railway was this park, it was difficult to pass it. So I asked someone on my way home to Paula Fredriksson for Shabbat dinner, where do I cross the Rakevet? And this person was carrying something, so he put down what he was carrying, and then he said, "You are already on the other side." And then he took what he and went on. And I thought, I didn't want the philosophical reflection. I wanted to know where I can pass the Rakevet. And in this city, in Jerusalem, there is this institute, the Swedish Theological Institute, and it's my privilege to teach there at Rehov HaNevim, in a building that Teddy Kollek, the famous mayor of Jerusalem for decades, he said that if I could choose any house where to live in Jerusalem, I would choose Beit Tavor, the house of Tabor. And it's still on the Hebrew Wikipedia, I believe. That is where I teach, and I devoted my teaching to fighting anti-Semitism and especially the kind of anti-Judaism that we find in Christian circles. I'm very proud, I'm very honored that my chair is named after Christer Stendahl, the legendary Harvard Divinity School professor and dean. And those of you who don't know him may want to hear this presentation of him. At the memorial service for him when he passed away, Susanna Heschel, the daughter of the legendary Avraham Yoshua Heschel, rose and entered the pulpit and described everything horrible that had happened in history and during the Second World War. And then she made a pause, and then she said, "But after the war, God sent Christer Stendahl." So that is the person that has done so much to build bridges of understanding between Jews and Christian, and you can understand what a privilege and what a humbling experience it is to be having his chair that's named after him. Tonight I would like to invite you to help us at Lund University and the Swedish Theological Institute to promote improved Jewish-Christian relations. And my dream is to have more possibilities to offer students scholarships for studies in Jerusalem. Not only for a few days, my dream would be for them to be there for a semester, because I'm convinced that their impressions, their knowledge, their insights would last for the rest of their lives. And I know this for a fact because that's what happened to me. I was there in 1990 for a semester, and it changed my life. I was one of those that I've been talking so much about tonight. So it's very much a self-critical, introspective perspective tonight. I didn't know anything about Judaism, but I thought I knew. I hadn't met many Jews, but I thought I knew what Jews think and want and fear and love. So that's why I'm so happy that I had this possibility to meet you tonight. And I invite you to join us in this important and exciting venture. I hope that many of you will find this project worthy of our support. And once again, I'm so grateful for this kind invitation to Keilat Yisrael. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you. Beautiful. Well, you can see why that was such a privilege for us to have you here, and how happy we were that our own former board member, soon to be another board member again, Robert Resnick, introduced us to you and to Lund and to the great work that you're doing in Jerusalem. I must say that there's nothing quite like spending a semester, or in my case, it was spending a year, my junior year, in Jerusalem studying. It certainly changed my life. It's how I ended up here also. You see, we both ended up here for the same reason. And it's, I want you to know what a special relationship we have actually with the Lutheran Church, which is next door. Yeah. Our Lutheran Church is next door, and while we were building this building, we tore down our previous synagogue. We lived in the Lutheran Church for almost 2 years, and they were such wonderful hosts to us, and we had such a great relationship there that I was almost sorry that we finished building the building, as much as I really love this new building, because there was something very precious and very special about sharing that space, sharing the sacred space. And not only that, during that time, our children were having, because we didn't have classrooms here, they were having their religious school at the Methodist Church. So they would have religious school at the Methodist Church and services at the Lutheran Church. And between the two of them, they really got a sense of what it meant to be in a community beyond ourselves, because even as a Jewish community, minorities in a majority culture, when all you do is hang out with other Jews, all the time and come to the synagogue, you don't know very much about what Christians think either, and about what their life is like, other than the popular culture of America as a Christian country. So there's something very powerful and very precious and very important about the work that you're doing, and the fact that we're able to have you here today, and we really deeply appreciate that. So I want to open this up to any questions or that any of you have, so that we can do that here.
Thank you very much. I thought that was a brilliant talk, and I'm sure we all did, and thank you very much for coming and sharing that. I have sort of a two-part question, which will be somewhat shorter than your lecture. Just kidding. What we hear, I'm sort of a Euro watcher. I follow sort of European news, and we always hear statistics and so on about the secularization of Europe. And in comparison to America, where you have this sort of this evangelical phenomenon, which has contributed so much to the American political system, that Europe is like church attendance, is the decline of Christianity as a central cultural force, let's say, compared to America. So the question is, to what extent is the anti-Semitism, the rising anti-Semitism, to what extent, if any, can we talk about a secular anti-Semitism, which has its roots? I mean, I don't question for a moment your historical explanation that it's a legacy. To what extent has it taken on a somewhat secular face? And then the second part of that is that, of course, I accept your argument that that Jews in Europe cannot be held accountable for policies in Israel. At the same time, in terms of human psychology, there is a sense in which, I'm not justifying the opposite, I'm not saying that Jews in Europe should be held accountable for Israeli policies, but there is a sense in which Jews, I think in America, and I'm sure also in Europe, tend to be, not all of them, but tend to be especially supportive of Israel. I mean, I think it's something we all feel. Yes, exactly. And so, in a sense, if you have, let's say, a group of French people who are Jewish, or a group of Swedish or German people or Spanish people who are Jewish, and who have a special loyalty to Israel, and support Israel, and give money to Israel, as it's something that we all feel as Jews. I mean, we all feel connected to Israel. It seems that, given that special connection, if Israel then, as a political entity, adopts certain, or not even policies, I think it's sort of a cliche that Israel tends to win military wars and lose diplomatic battles. So to what extent does that feed into let's say, a resentment, let's say the fact that Israeli policies or the presentation of them by the current administration, to what extent can the Jews in Europe who support Israel so much, to what extent can they completely escape any, you understand what I'm saying? And so the secular anti-Semitism and the inevitable connection with Israel, given the special support for Israel.
Thank you.
You're right, it was a little shorter than his speech.
Thank you very much for two important questions. So what about the interplay between the Christian legacy and the teaching of contempt and secularization? Well, couldn't one say that this has happened once before, and we saw that during the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, everything, that anti-Semitism didn't go away. Although they said everything to the Jew as an individual, but nothing to the Jewish people as a people, anti-Semitism was there. Voltaire, the father of Enlightenment, was a rabid anti-Semite. So I think what happened then is also happening now. Although the importance of Christianity is not as large today as it used to be, and church attendance, etc., is lower, the stereotyping, the discourse is still there. It survived secularization, that the scapegoating, the antitheses, and the prologuing, perhaps more the scapegoating and the antitheses, they are still there, very much so. So I agree with you that it survived secularization, and that is what's so disheartening. About the second question, I live in Jerusalem. I see problems. I just opened Jerusalem Post and Haaretz, and I listen to radio and TV, and I see demonstrations, and I meet people. Of course, if it's a country with people of flesh and blood, there are problems. There are multiple problems. But I at the same time, I very much feel that compared to what's going on in Egypt, compared to what's going on in Syria, it is very strange that one focuses in that way so much on what goes on in Israel. That is not to say that I don't think it's important, because I don't think that Israel should be compared to Syria and Egypt. I do think that one could, if you hear what I'm saying now, one could expect more from Israel, because Israel has been a democracy ever since it was founded in 1948. But I want it to be me that has higher standards for Israel. I don't want people to come to me in Jerusalem and comparing Israel to the horrible things going on in Syria today, and saying, well, if I look at these two, I think it's more problematic what goes on in Israel than in Syria. That's not fair. It's not fair if I'm driving 10 kilometers more than I should on the highway, and someone drives 200 kilometers. I don't know what that would be in miles per hour, but that's a lot in Europe. And that you say that the person driving 10 kilometers too much, that's the major problem. And the part of the scapegoating, I think, is that what I hear over and over and over and over and over again is that there's the redemptive aspect of the Middle East conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that if that were that to be solved, everything else in the world would be solved. That, for me, is an example of the secularization that Christians have been obsessed by, that if only Jews were baptized, then the kingdom of God would be here. And for me, that's a secularization of this persistent. Why is it so important to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And why is it not complex? And that's why I do think that it survived secularization. So thank you.
Thank you very much. There's also one other thing about anti-Semitism that I just wanted to add, which is, although we're all aware, and it was beautifully explained this evening as well, of the religious roots of anti-Semitism, religious anti-Semitism has a solution. There's a solution in theory to religious anti-Semitism, which is conversion. If you are religiously an anti-Semite, that is, you think you're against Jews because they killed Jesus, or however you want to formulate that from a religious perspective, then the solution to that problem is simply the conversion of Jews to Christianity and them stop being Jews. What certainly evolved dramatically in the 20th century and was made very clear by the Holocaust and by the entire Nazi theology was not a religious anti-Semitism, but a fundamental genetic anti-Semitism, a racial anti-Semitism from which there is no escape. Because if you are, by definition, as a Jew, deviant in your genes, if the only solution, which was the Nazi solution, was literally extermination, because there is nothing you can convert from, which is why Jews who weren't even Jewish were considered to be a part of the Jewish people and by the Nazis, then the entire world has shifted in the whole definition of what anti-Semitism is about, and the inability of Jews to escape from that, which I think is another platform upon which all of European anti-Semitism currently stands. The legacy of the 20th century and the legacy of the Nazi regime and the legacy of the Holocaust is really that subtle but fundamental shift from the religiousness of anti-Semitism to something much more insidious, something for which there is no escape and there's really no solution at all, because if you're Jewish, you can't be un-Jewish by simply converting if it's in your genes, if it's by definition, yeah.
Jesper, thank you for an absolutely wonderful, incredible, and exciting presentation. And when Rabbi Rubin talked about, that as the conversion of Jews being the elimination of the problem and the basis of the Holocaust, I was reminded of Wendy and my recent visit to Spain, where there were only 3 remaining synagogues from the pre-Inquisition time. And in fact, I think that was the basis some 500 years ago during the Inquisition of the same effort. My question is, in what countries do you see anti-Semitism as being expressed most strongly and with greater organization? For example, some of these ultra-right sort of neo-fascist parties coming up. In what countries do you see it more as sort of a, for lack of a better term perhaps, a visceral hatred?
Thank you. As we said, it's a multifaceted phenomenon, anti-Semitism, so it can be expressed in different ways, and there can be the driving force of it can be different. So in some countries, we obviously have right-wing parties, like Hungary. In other areas of Europe, I would say, and I'm interested in hearing what you say about that, but I would say that it's related to Muslim / Arab community. Not in any way saying that it's only to be found there, but that it's the discourse is so much an anti-Israeli one. So, for example, in the city of Malmö, only some 20 kilometers, and you have to figure out how many miles that is. Only 12 miles from where I live when I'm in Sweden, the rabbi, the Orthodox rabbi, dressed in dark clothes, etc., he is harassed on a regular basis, and he says that that's primarily from those who obviously come from first generation, second generation from the Muslim / Arab world. That's not to say that it's only to be found there, but that's where one can detect that it's expressed as an anti-Israeli discourse. And then I would say the third group, if the first one would be the right-wing parties, and the second one related somehow to this other group, and the third one is the left-wing anti-Judaism. That's expressed in another way. So it's in the name of égalité, fraternité that it's expressed. But the bottom line, the end of the day, is always that it's something problematic with a Jewish state. Not that there are decisions being made in Israel that are problematic, but that there is a Jewish state. It's a problem that there is a flag with the Magen David on. And I think I live in Northern Europe. So what is it that unites, and you may help me here, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Iceland, Great Britain, Greece, Georgia, all these countries, is that they have crosses on their flags. And very seldom do I hear in Europe it's deeply problematic, it's even disturbing that there's a Christian symbol on the flag. They are there for historical reasons, but we don't think of, if something happens in Sweden, that it's the necessary outcome of something in the Christian tradition in that way. Every summer we have a discussion going on in Sweden that poor people from Asia, especially Thailand, they sell everything they have and they take loans and they fly to Sweden in order to pick berries. And at the end of the summer, they don't have money to pay for the flight tickets because they're paid, the wages are so poor. This happens every summer, and we are equally surprised every year that it happens. And people eat all the marmalade and drink the thing that comes from the berries all the time without being a bit disturbed. But if someone came from Israel, if someone came from the United States and said that what goes on here with these poor people from Thailand, that it's somehow related to the Christian culture. Isn't there something in the New Testament that is the origin of this situation? And this insistence that there must be something in the Tanakh that results in the problematic aspects of Israel as it is post-1948, I find that very, very, very odd. So those are the three groups, I would say. Yes,
Question
please.
here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. I really appreciate it. Just to bring it back to that context that you presented just a moment ago with respect to the influx of North Africans into Western Europe, is the dynamic of Islam ostensibly overtaking Christianity in Western Europe, is that in any way likely to change the dynamic between Christians and Jews?
If it will change the dynamics between Christians and Jews. Let me see now. Will a growing Muslim population in Europe, will it change the dynamic? Well, I guess you have an answer, but my answer would be this, that what goes on in Malmö is very much related to those who have recently arrived from the Arab countries and Muslim world. But the way that it's being excused by the mayor of Malmö, the previous mayor, or by politicians in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, that is part of this, the old legacy, that you say that, well, given what goes on in Israel, one would have thought that the Jews in Sweden should demonstrate that they don't accept what goes on there. And I'm astonished. If someone said, I can't go, I can't treat Muslims with respect in Europe because women can't drive a car in Saudi Arabia. Is that kind of logic that we want to have in our society? So I think that I see it in the response to the action, the reaction to the actions. That's where I find it, the new relation between Jews and Christians, given that many who are politicians today are either Christian or post-Christian, that they have some kind of, the Christian legacy is there.
We have a few minutes left in the program. There's another question here.
Thanks. Two quick questions. Since your speech was wonderful and a little depressing, is there any good news? Are there any signs of of areas across Europe where pockets of Judaism are springing up where they weren't before?
Some closer.
Are there pockets in Europe where Judaism is springing up or coming back where it wasn't before? Is the first question. And the second question: do you think the Israeli government could or should be doing anything differently, almost in a PR point of view, to help them promote their a worldwide message to do anything to stem anti-Semitism?
Thank you. I don't know why I had a problem hearing that. Could you
First question was whether you know of any growth of the Jewish community in Europe. Are there any communities that are growing in Europe? He's looking for some good news. He doesn't understand that. It was just Friday night I was quoted the famous Jewish telegram, start worrying, details to follow. Anyway, so that was the first question.
Yeah. So the short answer would be no, I don't know of any Jewish communities in Europe that are growing in that sense. In the longer perspective, of course, Germany, given from 1945, etc. But otherwise, we are constantly talking about a minority that is not being protected as it should be. If I think of the Swedish taxpayers who vote in Sweden and not in Israel, and it's so humiliating and disturbing and alarming that when these Swedish citizens are being persecuted because they are Jews, they are ridiculed, or it's marginalized, or they say that the new anti-Semitism is something else. And I know that we are about to round up. So do you see how David Nierenberg's expression, this overcoming. So over and over I hear this, that the new Holocaust is something, and then you point in at another problem perhaps, and that might be an important problem, but don't take away what the Shoah was and what it stands for, and this deep wound it is in for the Jewish people. So this overcoming is so problematic. So let it be what it is. We have memorial days in Sweden. So the Kristallnacht, it would be one day. The 27th of January is another day. May I just end with this story? I have a friend in Jerusalem. Both he and she, both Fredja and Dov, they came from Poland. Both of them survived the war. She came with the white buses to Malmö and moved to Stockholm. And she met this young man who also survived the war, who spent his first years in Sweden in Gothenburg on the west coast. They met and they realized, we have survived the war and we have so much in common, so we are meant to meet. And now their son is the leader of the Hebrew Union College movement, Michael Marmer. When Fredja came to Sweden, she was 8 years old, and she told me that when she wanted to play with the other boys and girls in the street, someone said, you can play with us, but the condition is that you tell us what happened in the concentration camp. And that, for me, is very much what goes on in Europe today. That Jews are allowed to play, they are allowed to be part of the public debate, but only if they talk about the Shoah on the 27th of January and on the Kristallnacht, but no other aspects and no other days. That's part of the problem. So if you remember nothing but this tonight, remember Fredja Marmer when she was 8, 9 years old, and they told her, you are allowed to play with us, but only if you talk about the Shoah. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Professor Svartvik again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming this evening. And there's material out there if you want to learn about the Lund and the university and the foundation as well. Happy to have you do that.